Conquest has always been part of human history, but some conquerors stood out for their unparalleled brutality. They razed cities, butchered enemies, and built empires on a foundation of fear. These conquerors didn't just win battles, they fundamentally altered the course of human history, reshaping borders, cultures, and civilizations. In today's countdown, we rank the top 10 most ruthless conquerors in history. Who will claim the top spot? Stick around to find out. You won't want to miss this. Number 10. Hernán Cortés, the fall of the Aztec Empire. At number 10, we have Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador who toppled one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas, the Aztec Empire. Arriving in Mexico in 1519 with just a few hundred men, Cortés's quest seemed impossible at first. Yet through alliances with rival native tribes, his strategic manipulation of the Emperor Moctezuma, and his exploitation of European diseases, Cortés managed to achieve the unthinkable. Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities in the world at the time, and the Aztecs were formidable warriors. But Cortés was relentless. After capturing the emperor, things escalated quickly. He didn't just defeat the Aztecs, he dismantled their entire civilization. The siege of Tenochtitlan was brutal, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands. The Spanish burned much of the city, and the surviving population was enslaved or died from disease. Though he claimed to bring Christianity to the New World, Cortés's actions were driven by an insatiable hunger for gold and glory. His ruthlessness, especially toward indigenous peoples, leaves a legacy of conquest marred by bloodshed. However, his relatively short campaign compared to others on this list ranks him at number 10. Number 9. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of Europe. At number 9, we have Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest military minds in history. From a humble Corsican background, Napoleon rose to dominate Europe in a series of wars that reshaped the continent's political landscape forever. But Napoleon was more than just a brilliant strategist. He was a man driven by an unrelenting desire to expand his empire. After declaring himself Emperor of the French, Napoleon's ambitions knew no bounds. His armies swept through Europe like a storm, and while he did bring some progressive reforms to the countries he conquered, such as the Napoleonic Code, his campaigns were brutal. Tens of thousands died on the battlefield, and countless civilians were caught in the chaos. One of his most devastating campaigns was the invasion of Russia in 1812. Napoleon's forces, numbering over 600,000 men, marched deep into Russian territory, but they faced fierce resistance and brutal winter conditions. By the time the campaign ended, only a fraction of his men had survived. Despite the catastrophic losses, Napoleon's desire for dominance was undiminished, driving him to further conflict, leaving a wake of destruction wherever he went. Number 8. Julius Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul. At number 8 is Julius Caesar, a name synonymous with both brilliance and brutality. Caesar was not just a masterful politician, he was a general whose conquests laid the foundation for the Roman Empire. Perhaps his most ruthless campaign was the conquest of Gaul, a region that includes modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. For nearly a decade, from 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar waged war against the various Gallic tribes, using ruthless tactics to crush resistance. His campaigns resulted in the deaths of over 1 million Gauls, with another million enslaved. Entire tribes were eradicated, and Caesar didn't hesitate to use extreme violence to send a message to his enemies. One of his most infamous acts was the massacre of the Helvetii tribe, where nearly 60,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered. Caesar's reports of his victories were often written with cold detachment, as if the extermination of entire peoples was just another day's work. His conquest of Gaul not only expanded Rome's territory, but also gave him the power to challenge the Roman Republic itself, leading to his eventual dictatorship. 7. Attila the Hun, Scourge of God. Attila the Hun, also known as the Scourge of God, terrorized Europe in the 5th century and takes our 7th spot. Leading the nomadic Huns, Attila didn't just raid, he devastated. Under his command, the Hunnic armies swept across Eastern Europe, causing widespread panic and destruction. Few could stand in his way. Attila's invasions of the Eastern Roman Empire were particularly brutal. Cities were razed to the ground, their inhabitants slaughtered or sold into slavery. Attila had no mercy for those who resisted. His 447 CE campaign against the Balkans resulted in the destruction of over 70 cities. He left behind a wasteland where few survived to tell the tale. What made Attila particularly feared was his unpredictability. His enemies never knew where he would strike next, and his swift cavalry allowed him to terrorize vast areas with little warning. The Eastern Roman Empire was forced to pay tribute to keep the Huns at bay, but even that didn't guarantee safety. 6. Tamerlane, the Sword of Islam. At number 6, we have Tamerlane, also known as Timur, a 14th century conqueror whose legacy of brutality rivals that of Genghis Khan. Like Genghis, Tamerlane hailed from Central Asia, and he sought to create an empire just as vast. But Tamerlane's conquests were defined by one thing above all else: terror. Tamerlane's method of instilling fear was as simple as it was horrifying. After taking a city, he would order the construction of giant pyramids made from the heads of the slain. This grisly display was meant to send a clear message: resistance would not be tolerated, and the cost of defying Tamerlane was total annihilation. In one of his most infamous campaigns, Tamerlane sacked the city of Delhi in India, massacring over 100,000 people in a single day. His empire stretched from the Middle East to India, and wherever his armies went, destruction followed. Entire cities were wiped off the map, and millions perished in his campaigns. 5. Ivan the Terrible, the Tsar of Cruelty. Ivan IV of Russia, more commonly known as Ivan the Terrible, earns the 5th spot on our list. He was the first ruler of Russia to take the title Tsar, and he wielded his newfound power with a level of brutality that shocked even his contemporaries. Ivan was a complex figure, an ambitious leader who sought to centralize power in Russia and expand its territory, but his paranoia and violent outbursts left a legacy drenched in blood. Early in his reign, Ivan successfully conquered the Tatar Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, expanding Russia's borders. However, the methods he employed were far from ordinary. Ivan didn't just defeat his enemies, he eradicated them. The siege of Kazan in 1552, for example, ended in a massacre, with thousands of civilians slaughtered and entire populations displaced. As Ivan's reign continued, his paranoia spiraled out of control. Believing that his enemies were everywhere, he created the Oprichniki, a secret police force that became infamous for its cruelty. The Oprichniki were unleashed on anyone who Ivan suspected of disloyalty, and their methods were nothing short of terrifying. Torture, mass executions, and public floggings became common. One of the most infamous examples of Ivan's paranoia was the massacre of Novgorod in 1570, where tens of thousands of citizens were murdered over unproven accusations of treason. 4. Vlad the Impaler, the real Dracula. At number 4, we have Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, better known by his chilling nickname, Vlad the Impaler. Born into a world of conflict between the Christian kingdoms of Europe and the expanding Ottoman Empire, Vlad was shaped by violence from a young age. But his response to this violence was to become one of the most feared and ruthless rulers in history. Vlad's reign was marked by constant warfare, as he fiercely defended his small principality from both internal rivals and the Ottomans. But what set Vlad apart was his preferred method of punishment: impalement. The gruesome technique involved driving a wooden stake through a person's body, often leaving the victim to die slowly over several days. This method wasn't just about punishment, it was about sending a message of terror. In 1462, when Sultan Mehmed II sent an army of 150,000 men to capture Vlad, they encountered a sight that shocked even the hardened Ottoman troops: a forest of 20,000 impaled victims stretching for miles. The psychological impact of this macabre display cannot be overstated. The invading army turned back in horror, having seen firsthand the extent of Vlad's ruthlessness. 3. Genghis Khan, the Mongol menace. At number 3, we have Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in human history. Genghis Khan's military campaigns were nothing short of devastating. He united the nomadic Mongol tribes and forged them into an unstoppable war machine that terrorized Eurasia for decades. But it wasn't just his military genius that made Genghis Khan one of history's most ruthless conquerors. It was the sheer scale of destruction he unleashed. Genghis Khan was known for giving cities a simple choice: surrender and pay tribute, or face total annihilation. For those who resisted, the consequences were catastrophic. Entire populations were wiped out, and cities that resisted were reduced to ashes. The Mongols employed a policy of mass slaughter to ensure that resistance would not be repeated. Historians estimate that Genghis Khan's conquests resulted in the deaths of up to 40 million people. One of Genghis Khan's most infamous campaigns was the destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia. After the Shah of Khwarezm executed Mongol envoys, Genghis Khan responded with a fury that left entire cities in ruins. Not only were the inhabitants slaughtered, but the cities themselves were razed to the ground, leaving nothing but desolation isolation in the Mongol wake. These campaigns reshaped the political landscape of Central Asia and the Middle East for centuries. Number 2. Adolf Hitler, the architect of genocide. At number 2, we have Adolf Hitler, whose ruthless ambition led to one of the darkest chapters in human history. As the leader of Nazi Germany, Hitler's conquests were not just about territorial expansion. They were about the systematic extermination of entire groups of people. His ideology of racial purity and totalitarian control left a legacy of genocide, war, and devastation on a scale previously unseen. From the start of World War II, Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics overwhelmed much of Europe, allowing Nazi Germany to rapidly conquer vast territories. But his ambition for dominance was insatiable, and soon his forces marched into the Soviet Union, beginning the largest and bloodiest conflict in human history, the Eastern Front. Tens of millions died as entire cities were besieged and destroyed. But it wasn't just war that made Hitler one of history's most ruthless conquerors. It was his orchestrated genocide. The Holocaust resulted in the deaths of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Hitler's reign of terror aimed to annihilate not just nations, but entire ethnic groups. His vision of a world dominated by the so-called Aryan race led to atrocities on an unprecedented scale. One Joseph Stalin, the tyrant of the Soviet Union. Topping our list as the most ruthless conqueror in history is Joseph Stalin, the dictator who ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist. Though Stalin is often remembered for his role in leading the USSR through World War II, his true legacy is one of unfathomable cruelty. Stalin's reign of terror was defined by purges, forced collectivization, and the creation of a system that resulted in the deaths of tens of millions. After rising to power in the 1920s, Stalin quickly consolidated his control over the Soviet Union by eliminating anyone he saw as a threat. The Great Purge of the late 1930s saw millions of people executed or sent to the gulags, labor camps where prisoners faced inhuman conditions. But Stalin's ruthlessness didn't stop there. One of Stalin's most horrific acts was the man-made famine known as the Holodomor, which killed millions of Ukrainians in the early 1930s. Stalin's forced collectivization policies stripped peasants of their land and grain, leaving entire regions to starve. The famine wasn't an unintended consequence. It was a deliberate act of cruelty meant to crush resistance to his regime. By the time of his death in 1953, Stalin had left an indelible mark on the 20th century, one of brutality, repression, and terror. Estimates of those who died under his regime range from 20 to 60 million, making him the deadliest conqueror in history. Stalin's capacity for violence, both against his enemies and his own people, earns him the top spot as the most ruthless conqueror in history. These men shaped the world through fear, violence, and conquest. Their legacies are etched into history with the blood of millions. Though their empires have crumbled, the scars of their ruthlessness remain to this day. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most infamous figures. Which conqueror shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.